There is a great lake in the American West that is dying, and if it dies completely, it will not go quietly. It will leave behind something far more dangerous than an empty basin, a legacy of poison that could rise into the air and settle into the lungs of millions of people living in the cities along its shores. This is the Great Salt Lake, the largest saltwater lake in the hemisphere. A vast and ancient body of water that has defined the landscape and the life of its region for as long as anyone can remember. And it is shrinking, its water level falling, its shoreline retreating, exposing more and more of a lakebed that holds within it a hidden and terrible danger. Because when the water recedes and the bed of the lake dries and turns to dust, that dust carries poison, and the wind can lift it into the air and carry it to the cities nearby. If the Great Salt Lake dies, these cities breathe poison first, and understanding why is one of the most urgent environmental stories of today. In this video, we are going to explore this looming catastrophe in full and understand exactly how the death of a lake becomes a poison in the air. We are going to look at what the Great Salt Lake is and why it is dying, the imbalance between the water that flows in and the water that evaporates away, and the diversions and the drought that have driven it into decline. We are going to uncover the hidden danger buried in the lakebed, the toxic substances that lie trapped beneath the water and wait to be exposed. We are going to trace the mechanism of the catastrophe, the way the exposed bed dries to a poison dust that the wind can lift and carry to the cities nearby. We are going to understand the health effects of breathing that dust, who is most at risk, and why the proximity of the lake to a major population center makes the danger so immediate. We are going to consider the ecological and economic dimensions of the lake's death, the birds and the industries that depend on it. And we are going to ask what can be done to prevent the disaster, and which cities would breathe the poison first if it is not prevented. Stay with us, because this is a slow-motion catastrophe unfolding right now. And it is a warning about what happens when a great lake is allowed to die beside a city. To grasp the danger, you first have to understand what the Great Salt Lake is and why its death would be so catastrophic. It is a terminal lake, meaning that water flows into it from the rivers and streams of its watershed, but has no outlet to the sea. So the water that arrives can only leave by evaporating into the air. Over the ages, this process has concentrated the salts and minerals carried in by the rivers, making the lake intensely salty, far saltier than the ocean, a unique and remarkable environment. The lake is enormous, or has been, spreading across a vast area, a defining feature of its region. A place of striking beauty and ecological importance, home to millions of birds and the base of a food web that sustains an extraordinary abundance of life. It is a natural wonder, an ancient and irreplaceable ecosystem, and it sits right beside a major metropolitan area, its shores close to the cities where a large population lives. But this Great Lake is in serious trouble, because it has been shrinking, its water level dropping to alarming lows, exposing vast stretches of the lakebed that were once underwater. The reason is a fundamental imbalance between the water flowing into the lake and the water leaving it through evaporation. The lake depends on the rivers and streams that feed it, carrying the snowmelt and runoff from the surrounding mountains and watershed, and for the lake to remain stable, the water arriving must roughly balance the water evaporating away. But over the years, less and less water has been reaching the lake, diverted before it can arrive, drawn off for the many uses that a growing population and a thirsty agriculture demand. The water that would have flowed into the lake is instead taken for cities, for farms, for industry, so that the inflow has been reduced far below what the lake needs, and the level has fallen accordingly. This diversion is compounded by a warming climate and periods of drought, which reduce the water available and increase the evaporation, deepening the imbalance. In dry years, less snow falls in the mountains, less runoff reaches the rivers, and less water flows toward the lake, while the heat drives evaporation ever higher, pulling more water from the shrinking surface. The combination of the diversions, which take the water before it can reach the lake, and the drought and warming, which reduce the supply and increase the loss, has driven the Great Salt Lake into a steep decline, its level falling, its area shrinking, its future thrown into doubt. The lake that has existed for ages, a fixture of its region, is now at risk of drying up, of shrinking so far that it effectively dies, and the exposed lakebed grows with every foot the water falls. Here is where the real danger enters. The reason the death of the lake threatens the health of millions. The bed of the Great Salt Lake, the ground that has lain beneath its waters, is not clean, ordinary soil. Over the ages. As the rivers carried their loads of sediment and minerals into the terminal lake, and as human activity added its own contributions, the lakebed accumulated a burden of harmful substances, including toxic elements and heavy metals that settled into the sediment and were held there, safely covered by the water. As long as the water covers the lakebed, these substances are trapped, sealed beneath the surface, posing no threat to the air or to human health. The water is a lid, keeping the poison contained. But when the water recedes and the lakebed is exposed to the air, that lid is removed, and the toxic sediment lies bare, dried by the sun, ready to be lifted by the wind. This is the mechanism of the catastrophe. When the exposed lakebed dries out, it turns to a fine dust, and that dust contains the toxic substances that accumulated in the sediment over the ages. The wind, sweeping across the exposed bed, can pick up this dust and carry it into the air, lofting clouds of fine, poison-laden particles that drift on the breeze. And, because the cities lie so close to the lake, right beside it, downwind of the exposed bed, these clouds of toxic dust can blow directly over the populated areas, settling over the cities and into the lungs of the people who live there. This is how the death of the lake becomes a threat to human health, how the drying of a distant body of water becomes a poison in the air that millions must breathe. The exposed lakebed is a vast reservoir of toxic dust, and the wind is the mechanism that delivers it to the cities nearby. The dust itself is dangerous in multiple ways. First, there is the simple fact of the fine particulate matter. The tiny particles of dust that, regardless of their chemical content, are harmful to breathe. Fine particles small enough to be inhaled deep into the lungs are a well-known health hazard, capable of causing and worsening respiratory and cardiovascular problems, and a landscape of exposed lakebed generating clouds of such particles is a serious threat to air quality on its own. But the dust from the Great Salt Lake carries an added danger because of the toxic substances it contains. The heavy metals and other harmful elements that accumulated in the sediment are lifted along with the dust, so that the particles people breathe carry not just the ordinary hazard of fine dust, but the additional poison of the toxic contaminants. This combination of fine particulate matter laced with toxic substances makes the dust from the dying lake especially dangerous, a genuine threat to the health of anyone who breathes it. The health effects of breathing such dust can be severe and wide-ranging. In the short term, exposure to the dust can irritate the eyes, the throat, and the airways, and can trigger or worsen respiratory problems, particularly for those with conditions like asthma. Over the longer term, sustained exposure to fine particulate matter and toxic substances can contribute to a range of serious health problems affecting the lungs, the heart, and other systems. And the specific toxic elements in the dust carry their own dangers, some of them associated with serious long-term health effects. The people most at risk are the vulnerable, the children whose developing bodies are especially susceptible, the elderly, those with existing respiratory or cardiovascular conditions, and anyone whose health is already compromised. But everyone who breathes the dust is exposed to its dangers, and in a region where the dust could blow over a large and populous area. The potential health impact is enormous, affecting the well-being of a great many people. This is why the death of the Great Salt Lake is so much more than an environmental or ecological concern, though it is certainly that as well. It is a public health emergency in the making, a threat to the lungs and the lives of the large population that lives in the cities near the lake. The people of these cities, going about their lives, may not realize that the shrinking of the lake beside them poses a direct threat to the air they breathe, that the exposed lakebed is a growing source of toxic dust that could, with the wrong winds, blanket their communities in poison. The connection between the distant drying lake and the air in the cities is not obvious. But it is real, and it is dangerous, and it means that the fate of the lake is bound up with the health of the millions who live in its shadow. It is worth emphasizing just how large the exposed area can become, because the scale of the potential dust source is part of what makes the danger so severe. The Great Salt Lake is enormous, and as it shrinks, the area of exposed lakebed grows correspondingly until vast stretches of the former lake bottom lie bare, dried, and ready to generate dust. This is a potentially immense expanse, a huge source of toxic dust capable of producing enormous clouds when the winds are strong. The larger the exposed area grows, the greater the potential for dust generation, and the more severe the threat to the cities becomes. As the lake continues to decline, this exposed area expands, and with it the danger, so that the drying of the lake is a growing threat, worsening with every foot the water falls. The situation of the Great Salt Lake is made especially poignant and alarming by the fact that it is not a remote or isolated wilderness, but a lake right beside a major population center, its shores close to where a large number of people live. This proximity is what makes the dust threat so immediate and so dangerous, because the toxic dust does not have far to travel to reach the cities. A drying lake in the middle of an empty wilderness would be an ecological tragedy, but not necessarily a direct public health threat. A drying lake right beside a major metropolitan area is a different matter entirely, a source of toxic dust positioned to blow directly over a large population, and it is this combination of a shrinking toxic lakebed and a nearby population that creates the specific and urgent danger that the death of the Great Salt Lake represents. The role of the wind is central to the danger, and it is worth understanding how the toxic dust would actually reach the cities, because it is the wind that turns a drying lakebed into a public health threat. On calm days, the exposed bed may lie quiet, but when the wind rises, especially the strong winds that sweep across the open expanse of the former lake, it can lift the fine. Dried sediment into the air in great clouds. These dust storms, born on the exposed bed, can travel considerable distances, carried by the wind toward whatever lies downwind, and when the cities lie in that path, the dust blows over them, fouling their air. The frequency and severity of these events depends on the winds, on how often and how strongly they blow across the exposed bed and in the direction of the populated areas, and the geography of the region, with the lake position near the cities, means that the winds can and do carry the dust toward the population. Each dust event is a pulse of poison, a cloud of toxic particles sweeping over the communities, and as the exposed area grows. These events can become more frequent and more severe, a mounting assault on the air that the cities breathe. There is a further danger in the way the dust can degrade the air quality of a region already prone to pollution. The cities near the Great Salt Lake, nestled in their valley and ringed by mountains, are subject to conditions that can trap pollution and concentrate it in the air. And the addition of the toxic dust from the drying lake would compound an air quality problem that already exists. On the days when the dust blows in and combines with the other pollution that can accumulate in the valley, the air can become genuinely hazardous. The dust does not arrive in otherwise pristine air, but adds its poison to an atmosphere that can already be burdened with pollution, pushing the air quality to dangerous levels and multiplying the harm. There are sobering precedents for exactly this kind of disaster, other cases in which the drying of a lake has exposed a toxic lakebed and created a dust hazard for the surrounding area. The pattern is a known one, a recognized danger, and it has played out before in other places where lakes have been drained or have dried up, leaving behind exposed beds that generate harmful dust. These precedents are a warning, a demonstration of what can happen when a lake dies and its bed is exposed, and they lend a grim credibility to the fears surrounding the Great Salt Lake. The scientists and officials who study the lake and warn of the dust danger are not speculating idly, but drawing on real examples of the harm that a drying lake can inflict, and the prospect of the same kind of disaster unfolding beside a major American city on a potentially even larger scale is a genuine and serious concern. The ecological dimension of the lake's death should not be forgotten, because the Great Salt Lake is a vital ecosystem whose loss would be a tragedy in its own right, quite apart from the dust threat. The lake is a crucial habitat for enormous numbers of birds, a key stop for migratory species, and the base of a food web that supports an extraordinary abundance of life. The unique, intensely salty environment sustains specialized organisms found in few other places, and these in turn feed the vast populations of birds that rely on the lake. If the lake dies, This entire ecosystem collapses, and an irreplaceable natural wonder is lost. This ecological catastrophe is intertwined with the human catastrophe of the toxic dust, both flowing from the same source. The drying of the Great Lake. The economy of the region is also bound up with the health of the lake. The Great Salt Lake supports various industries and economic activities, from the extraction of minerals from its waters to the harvesting of its unique biological resources to the recreation and tourism its presence enables. As the lake declines, these activities are threatened, and its death would represent a significant economic blow to the region, on top of the ecological and public health disasters. The lake is valuable in many ways, ecologically, economically, and as a defining feature of its region, and its loss would be felt across all of these dimensions. So what can be done to prevent this looming disaster? The fundamental answer is to get more water to the lake, to reverse or at least halt the decline by increasing the flow that reaches it and restoring the balance between inflow and evaporation. Because the primary cause of the lake's decline is the diversion of the water that would otherwise flow into it. The primary solution is to reduce those diversions to allow more water to reach the lake. This means using less water in the watershed, conserving in the cities, improving the efficiency of the agriculture that consumes the largest share, and finding ways to leave more water in the rivers and streams so that it can flow to the lake. It is a matter of choices, of deciding to prioritize the survival of the lake and the health of the people it threatens over the competing demands for the water. If enough water can be returned to the lake, its decline can be halted and perhaps reversed. The exposed lakebed can be covered again, and the dust threat can be diminished. But this is easier said than done, because the water that the lake needs is the same water that the region's cities and farms depend on, and returning it to the lake means taking it away from those uses. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of the crisis, the competition between the needs of the lake and the demands of the human population and economy that have grown up around it. Every drop of water returned to the lake is a drop not available for the farms and the cities, and so restoring the lake requires real sacrifices, real reductions in the water available for human use. This makes the solution difficult, politically and economically, because it demands that the region give up some of the water it has come to rely on in order to save the lake and prevent the dust disaster. The choice is between the short-term interest in using the water and the longer-term imperative of saving the lake and protecting the public health. And it is a choice the region has struggled to make. The urgency of the situation cannot be overstated. Because the lake is declining now, the exposed lakebed is growing now, and the dust threat is materializing now, not in some distant future. Every year that the decline continues, the danger grows, the exposed area expands, and the risk to the cities increases. The window for action is not unlimited, because if the lake is allowed to die, if it shrinks past the point of no return, the consequences may become irreversible, the ecosystem lost, the dust disaster unleashed. There is still time to act, to return water to the lake and halt its decline, but that time is not infinite, and the longer the region waits, the harder the problem becomes, and the closer the catastrophe draws. The death of the Great Salt Lake is not inevitable, but preventing it requires action now, before the point of no return is passed. The story of the Great Salt Lake is, in the end, a story about the connections between the choices we make and the consequences we face, about the way that the diversion of water for human use, undertaken without regard for the survival of the lake, can rebound to threaten the very people who took the water. The region drew off the water that fed the lake to serve its growing population and its thirsty agriculture, and in doing so, it set in motion a chain of events that now threatens the health of that same population, as the dying lake prepares to release its poison into the air. It is a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of our demands on the natural world, about the way that a lake can be loved and relied upon and yet quietly starve to death, and about the price that may be paid when a great ecosystem is allowed to die. The toxic dust is the lake's revenge, in a sense, the poison it releases as it dies, blowing back over the cities that took its water. And so the question posed at the beginning demands an answer. If the Great Salt Lake dies, which cities breathe poison first? The answer is the cities that lie closest to the lake, downwind of the exposed bed, the population centers near its shores that would be directly in the path of the toxic dust. These are the communities most immediately at risk, the ones that would feel the effects of the dust first and most severely, whose air would be fouled by the poison rising from the dying lake. But the danger could extend beyond them, carried on the winds to a wider area, affecting a large population across the region. The cities near the Great Salt Lake are on the front line of this looming disaster, and their fate is a warning of what awaits any community that allows a toxic lake to die beside it. There is a broader lesson in the plight of the Great Salt Lake that reaches beyond its own shores, because it is not the only terminal lake in the world facing this kind of decline, and the dynamic that threatens it. The diversion of water, combined with a warming, drying climate, is at work in many places. Saline lakes around the world are shrinking under similar pressures, and where they lie near human populations, they carry the same potential to expose toxic beds and generate hazardous dust. The Great Salt Lake is a particularly stark and immediate example, positioned right beside a major city, but the pattern it represents is a global one. A warning about the consequences of draining the water that sustains these unique and fragile bodies of water. What happens at the Great Salt Lake is a preview of a challenge that many regions may face as the pressure on water grows and the climate warms. The looming crisis of the Great Salt Lake is a reminder that the environmental challenges we face are not always distant or abstract, but can strike directly at our health and our lives in immediate and tangible ways. The drying of the lake is not just a loss of natural beauty or a blow to the birds, though it is those things. It is a gathering threat to the lungs and the well-being of millions of people, a public health disaster taking shape in slow motion, driven by the choices we make about how to use our water. To prevent it, the region must act, must find a way to return water to the lake, must summon the will to make the sacrifices that saving the lake requires. The alternative is to allow the lake to die and to face the consequences, to watch the toxic dust rise from the exposed bed and blow over the cities, to breathe the poison that the dying lake releases. The Great Salt Lake is dying, and the cities beside it are in the path of its poison, and the time to act, to save the lake, and to protect the people is now, before the water falls too far and the dust begins